Welcome everybody. I'm delighted to see you all. And we're going to talk about anti-woke fiction. Now, just for the reader's benefit or the viewer's benefit, we have never met. The four of us have never met. We've read each other's work. We know each other's work, but we have never met in the real world. And so this is the first time the four of us have come together to talk about our own anti-woke fiction. And then we're going to talk about the prospects for anti-woke fiction and the publishing industry and what else you're working on. And we're trying to, certainly part of my mission here is to be helpful to the many writers who write to me privately and say, I've got anti-woke fiction, how on earth do I get it published? And usually my response is not particularly optimistic about getting things published, but I'm going to have a discussion with you three about what your advice is to other writers. So I want to certainly learn about your writing styles and your next projects, and we want to learn how we can advise other people writing similar anti-woke fiction. So this genre that is being ignored by the publishing industry, but is so exciting for those of us who are actually reading it. So look, Joe, Kevin, Rasmus, thank you for doing this. Now, I'm going to ask you first of all, you've all written very different books. So I'm going to ask you what your inspirations were. So I've got some of the books here. That's mine. Now, Joe, I'm going to just mention for the viewers' benefit, these are very different books. So mine, I'm going to characterize mine as a straight satire of woke academia. Now, Joe's Leith or Lethe is a dystopian. It's sort of science fictional. I think, would you agree? It's science fictional. It's dystopian, of a extreme authoritarian socialist regime, and you focus. It's a worldwide regime, but it's focused. Your book is focused in Britain. So I'd say that's a political dystopia. I think. Would you agree with me on that?
Nailed it.
Yeah, thank you. And then Rasmus, you know, this starts a very, I've reviewed this in public as starting as a very funny satire of current wokeness, ends horrific. There's a horrific final bit to it. And then Kevin, I can't show your book because another academic is reading it, but yours is another academic satire. Is that fair? Do you want to add? Does anybody want to add a nuance to how you would describe your own work?
Well, I'll just, because the last book you referred to was mine, I don't think there's much more to add. There's much more to it than that, but as a broad rubric, yeah, I can go with that, anti-academic.
Yeah, and I think the other thing I should mention is all of us bridge countries, we bridge regions. So all of us take our main characters across the world. I think that's an interesting motivation, which I haven't thought about before. I mean, I didn't set out to make my character a world trotter, but in order to satirize academia, you have to follow a typical academic's international travels, at least, if not their international employment. And wokeness is so international. Wokeness has a motivation to be transnational, right? It doesn't like localism. So I think when you're anti-woke, you write anti-woke, you're going to be transnational, if not international. Is anybody else conscious of trying to be international or transnational in their settings?
Well, bad ideas cross borders, right? Marxism makes it to Cambodia's killing fields and so forth. So if you're writing anti-woke fiction, you kind of have to pursue those bad ideas wherever they go.
Yeah. Rasmus, Kevin, did you think of it?
I'm kind of surprised that Chile's new proposal for new constitution is very inspired by woke ideology, because Chile is usually like 10 to 40 years behind in social development. They only legalized divorce in 2004. But now, yeah, it's interesting because the old guard of the far left, they were really machista, you know, they were You look at the Politburo in Cuba, they're all men, mainly white men actually. But now there's something going on in the far left.
Yeah, and I should
Latin
mention
America,
people who haven't read your book yet. It starts in Denmark, but it goes to Chile, and you're quite predictive, right? So you wrote this book before Chile's new constitution was
yeah.
completed. So you're quite. I mean, you're predictive, or you're prescient at least, right?
Yeah, well, that already made the system with special seats for indigenous peoples, some of which have gone extinct many years ago, some of which are real. But anyway, you should have indigenous people in all the major political parties from left to right. But no, they want a sort of racially segregated election system. So yeah, that was really shocking for me. And the way it was just accepted from left to right, it was just universally lauded as a great, stupendous racial reckoning, which to me it was racial segregation, unheard of.
Yeah. Now, Kevin, your character trots to Germany, so German specialist like yourself in real life, trots across American states, back and forth between Europe and in France. What was your motivation for being so international?
Trying to find a job, of course, at the time. But of course, you're referring to the book. Why did I want to keep it so close to my own experience? Well, you're exactly right. These days, and even stretching back to, yes, the early 90s, academics were very global. And yeah, you can also mention Tel Aviv, Berlin, Paris, LA, San Diego, New York, Madrid. Hit all those places where I know wherever I speak. But the main thing is that despite all these differences in culture and the great distances separating these various places, the academic elite, they all think alike. See, that's the point. They all think alike. It's like you go from Israel to Berkeley. I don't have much experience of London, so I left that to you and others who know it better than I. But Berlin, Paris, it's all the same, which for me was a great disappointment because I like the differences in people. That's what was the motivation, if you're speaking about motivation in a real world sense, that at that time, why I went into academia. Travel, get to see different places, different peoples. But if you're just going to be in that academic cocoon, it's very disheartening. You don't really get out to experience different worlds. You're all talking to each other in the same language, yakety yak, and it's all theoretical and all this other crap. So, yeah, good riddance. But I felt I could use it to good effect in my novel, and I also love picaresque novels. So there you have it.
Well, curiously, sorry to interrupt there, Bruce, but there's that anti-diversitarian element of the left. So when your character, or when you go to Israel, you discover the exact same kind of, I guess at the time it was radical feminism that you would have anywhere else in the West. And so you're not seeing a unique local culture manifest in the ideas or what have you. It's just the uniformity across the board.
Correct.
So, yeah. Although the demonstration and manifestation in your book, it was used to great effect and pretty funny, right? I think the Judith character had me laughing. Yeah.
I think there's a Judith in every major city in the Western world, at least one.
Well, so in popular culture, people are talking about Karens, but maybe they should start talking about Judiths. Maybe Judiths are the academic Karens.
Hey, maybe we'll set a trend. Hope so.
Yeah. So, all right. So that's Kevin's last comment. Segues to the next question. It's which prior writers, novelists, fiction writers, particularly, have inspired any of you?
Okay, should I start then? I think Octavia Butler is great. Aldous Huxley, of course, and George Orwell. There's some Spanish-speaking and Danish-speaking writers as well. Cortázar, Borges. Yeah, and also I read a lot of nonfiction, American history, captivity narratives. I read 12 Years a Slave before it became a movie.
Yeah.
And daily news. The daily news is very inspiring for novel purposes, I think.
Yeah, that's very diverse, Rasmus. Actually, I didn't. I certainly saw Aldous Huxley and George Orwell in your work. I hadn't thought about 12 Years a Slave. I mean, just to give something away. So this is a bit of a spoiler in your book. So there is sort of but real slavery and virtual slavery featured in your book, which eventually makes it horrific. It turns to I'm not horrific. I should say it turns to horror. That's a better. Turns from satire to horror. Yeah, so yeah, thank you. Yeah. Kevin, Joe?
Well, I was going to say, in the article that kind of kicked off your series of reviews, because you've really undertaken this hard look at the anti-woke fiction and so forth, but you mentioned, and you call him a conservative, so I don't know about that, but G.K. Chesterton. And so like that's a big one. And but these kind of paradoxical figures who don't really necessarily fit in one camp or another. Philip K. Dick's another, who was, a veritable pinko, but at the same time, they couldn't really put him in a box as well. And I guess he's from your neck of the woods down in South Cal when you guys were teaching there. But those two for sure. And I'm in the same boat as Rasmus. A lot of nonfiction because the truth usually is more horrifying and provocative than anything else.
That's a great point. Yeah, I mean, nonfiction certainly has inspired some of my work. I mean, I'm satirizing real life. So most of the inspirations for the situations and the scenarios that I fictionalize are real. The style, I'll just mention, the style is, for me, my style of writing is influenced by Evelyn Waugh, who is certainly conservative and I would say, was anti-woke before we would ever think of that term. He opposed the fashionable trends that he lived through, right? He lived through a radical change of political structure in Britain to socialism after the Second World War. And he certainly foresaw wokeness, although obviously it wasn't known as wokeness then. So, Kevin, you're last to betray your inspiration.
Oh, I can make this quick, but just a comment on you and your book. What it reminded me of actually was a play by Oscar Wilde. Because of the wordplay, it's a wordplay extravaganza because you're quite talented with words, but also because you're in that world, right? Where academics, they believe that to manipulate the language, it can manipulate thought, and they're right. And so you show that across a broad spectrum of fields and milieu and all that kind of thing, and you do it superbly. So Oscar Wilde, I was thinking when I was reading your thing. For me, I'm very provincial. I'm a Californian in a very real way, and I love Los Angelian actually, and I love LA California writers. Raymond Chandler, love him. James M. Cain, born in Maryland, but we'll take him on as a Southern California writer. Jack London, I love Jack London. I like Hemingway, despite your snide little comment.
I don't like Hemingway.
That he's overrated.
I mean, I'll just put a note there. You mentioned wordplay. Hemingway's vocabulary is so limited, and he sort of took pride in that. And I find his scenarios unrealistic and his dialogue very stilted, and just to justify my my public dislike of Hemingway.
I won't even deign to defend that weak attack, but I will. If you do another podcast on Hemingway, I'll be happy to join in the.
All right,
thread.
I'll let you try to persuade me.
So I like LA writers. I like Charles Bukowski is another one. I'm a great fan of his.
Pynchon?
They lay down the truth, and they are skillful in doing so, and that's also why I like Hemingway.
Yeah. Well, Kevin, I'm going to bounce back your compliment because I thought your wordplay was excellent too, and also in an academic sense, you expose some of that academic hypocrisy, self-contradiction in their wordplay, that words matter and that they can change reality just by relabeling reality as its opposite.
Right.
And I'm going to bounce that to Joe too. So in Laith, your dystopian future socialist world government with a provincial government in Britain, that does a lot of Orwellian wordplay and spinning of the truth. And Rasmus, your 50 Shades of Woke. There's a lot of, I mean, you're really good at portraying at a really local level the ridiculousness of people's wordplay. So, you know, particularly your transgender character. I mean, as I'm thinking back on it, I think that was the funniest chapter for me, was when the transgender character was trying to play it both ways, right? They were trying to be it was clearly male, but this was a male character, but trying to be a fragile female victim, even though the character is clearly bigger than anybody. And you at several points in other situations, you really expose this hypocrisy. So I think you can agree or disagree with me on this. I think I'm going to rule that one of the characteristics of anti-woke fiction is that we expose the ridiculous word abuse, the abuse of words in woke discourse. Is that I think we all share that in common. I think that's probably fundamental to anti-woke fiction, right?
Hear, hear.
Well, I think one of the things is the left, transmogrifies language to subvert reality and apply control. And so if in anti-woke fiction, if you're lampooning them or at least, caricaturizing them, then you have to play with the language to really throw it back in their faces, or at least to form the basis of the mockery.
Yeah,
I do like the playing with stereotypes, being against stereotypes. I mean, not everything is bad about wokeness. It's a good thing that we are aware of our biases and that we are aware of stereotypes. I see how many works of fiction have this super evil, super psychopathic, super funny, super villain. And how many works of fiction is that a black woman? Now there's a new stereotype. Yeah, women are wonderful. It's the same thing, really. You only show real respect to people when you treat them equally, right? In criticism and in praise.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, I'm going to add a second defining characteristic of anti-woke literature, which is that we expose the hypocrisies in stereotypes. So wokeness is racist and sexist, but they pretend to be anti-racist and anti-sexist. But all they're doing is they're turning the prejudice around. They're just changing the direction of it. So I think, Rasmus, yes, you're 50 Shades of Woke. You're exceptionally good. I'm going to say probably you're the only writer I have seen who turns these stereotypes around and exposes how toxic are the peddlers of wokeness themselves. I'll just leave that out there. All right, thank you, everybody. So where are we? So now let's turn to the publishing industry. Now, my next question is, just to foreshadow this, is going to be about your experiences with book agents, publishing agents. I'm just going to clarify that I ended up self-publishing. I could not get an agent interested. I could not get a publisher directly interested, and there's two characteristics of the responses I got, and I'm interested to hear how you would characterize the responses you received. Firstly, they were politically antagonistic. You cannot criticize wokeness. Their attitude, the industry's attitude, is our mission is to promote wokeness. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is, I don't think that in the agents I was dealing with, I don't think they really understood fiction. I mean, I don't think they were well read. Their writing in their own correspondence was terrible. They could not articulate a critique which made sense. Right, so those are my two observations. First of all, they're clearly promoting wokeness, but what and I expected that, but what surprised me, what I didn't expect, was that particularly the agents, but even the publishers, they don't seem very literary people. They seem more like political activists than literary experts. Right, I've put that out there. So who wants to follow up with their own experiences? Did anybody get an agent?
Well, I just think anyone listening right now, if they think this is hyperbolic in any way, shape, or form, go to mswishlist.com, manuscriptwishlist.com. And identity is always prioritized about narrative. Narrative is sometimes not even mentioned. Maybe you'll get genre. I want something written by X, Y, and Z. They have to basically, it's a litmus test for beliefs, but also pigmentation, orientation, sexual preferences, proclivities. And story is, it comes not even secondary, it's just tertiary. And so I think that's super interesting. In terms of getting an agent, jumping through the hoops, I think it's now even impossible. And I know this is slightly peripheral, but a friend and I had packaged a number of TV shows and films. One of them was an Arab Western. And we went to the head of, it was called Sons of Abraham. We spent like 50 hours on this thing. It was solid. And we went to a film festival, pitched it to all these people. And we spoke to several people about it. And everyone loved the idea. But in 9 occasions, it basically got the exact same answer. But the most egregious was the head of a European distribution and film company. She goes, "You're not the people to tell the story. I love it, but you're not the people to tell the story." And so I thought, well, no one else has spent the 50 hours on this. No one else is going to bring this to you. So no one's going to tell the story. And I think it's unfortunate, but I would say the same is true of the literary agents. You're not the people to tell the story, and they don't even care what the story is.
Yeah, I mean, I'm laughing because my disposition is to, be upbeat about this, but I mean, Joe's comment there is shocking, isn't it? It's disgusting, really. With the experience you had is disgusting. I mean, we laugh about it because what else you do, but because the woke is funny, but at the same time they are censoring and suppressing talent, real talent, and woke fiction is just boring. It's so repetitive. I've said this in print. It's all the same. It just creates it just tacks on a slightly variant narrative, fictional narrative around the one point, which is that racism is bad, sexism is bad, and every woke novel these days is just a variant of that in a slightly different setting. It's so boring.
Well, if I can get in here, they all go to the same creative writing classes in schools. Of course, it's all this incestuous crap, and I know this for a fact. I took a creative writing course at one point. I know creative writing professors. I know how this works. They admit it. They say, yeah, you go to the creative writing school, go to Iowa, wherever the hell you go, to make your connections. It's just like academia. You go there to make your connection, and that's why this stuff that gets published, woke or not, is basically crap. It really is. It's like, because when I pick up a book and I think I might be interested in reading it, and I open it, and I ask myself, has this been written by someone who is completely unique, that it could be written by no one else? I can never say that about any of the literature I look at in bookstores today. It's all the same kind of mushy, kind of, mealy-mouthed, has no bite, has no dash, no panache. And that's what I miss. And for me, that's the definition of woke literature. It has no guts. So that's the editorial. Not about agents, but I can get back to that later if you like.
But just on that, there's an excitement, like reading Rasmus's book, reading your book, reading Bruce's. because you're so used to or accustomed to seeing something that is ideologically uniform and just predictable, when you get something that's outside that
It's
mainstream,
even the style that's predictable.
right? And
It's-
the timing, the pacing, everything. So
Yeah,
when
it's
you
no
get
pace. They have no pace.
yeah.
Rasmus.
Yeah. Well, I've got the same reply from every single agent. It's not a good fit for us. Not a good fit. I don't know what goes on in their head. I don't want to accuse them of being censorship or I don't know. You know, sometimes I talk to, because I have a lot of connection with Ethiopians. I know many Ethiopians in Western countries, and when they can't find a job, they say, is it racism? And it's not like they want to make themselves into victims. They're just genuinely worried. So I was sort of trying to, I always tell them, you know, you don't know what goes on in the employer's head. So I was trying to tell myself the same thing. Like, you don't know what goes on in their head. So, but yeah, you're right. I mean, it's always the same. And I deliberately make my book sort of look provocative from the get-go. So I wasn't expecting anything else, to be honest.
Yeah. But Kevin, I'm going to go back to you and ask you if you would give your, would describe your experience with agents. I'm just going to add to Kevin brought up creative writing. Now, that's an interesting issue. That is an issue. Now, I have said in private to writers who approach me and ask for my advice, I say, do not take a creative writing course because you're not going to learn creative writing. You're going to learn a political bias. It's like I say to educators, academics, if you want to learn how to teach, do not take an education certificate because you're not going to learn how to educate. You're going to learn a political bias. And so I think I'm just going to add to Kevin's comment, agreeing with it. I think the reason why creative writing courses have become so homogenous, so dull and actually unhelpful is because they're essentially politicized and they've lost sight of creative writing itself. I'm not sure if you agree with that. I mean, I'm not sure if anybody wants to agree with the advice, if you want to be a good creative writer, do not take a creative writing course today. That would be my advice. I don't know if anybody wants to agree with that or not, or push back on that.
I agree.
It's Procrustean, right?
Yeah.
It make you fit the mold.
Yeah. All right, Kevin, would you tell us about your experiences with agents so far as you can?
It's summed up in one word: terrible. I never got any, where with agents. I've had a couple, right? Got to first base, but they never sold anything. And the best compliment I ever got from an agent was about 5 years ago, and I was shopping around this epic poem I had written about Errol Flynn. And the woman, who's very nice, big New York agent, I'd been like badgering her all these years with my various books. And then she finally broke down. She said, "Kevin, the problem with you is you're determinedly non-commercial." I took that as a compliment. I said, okay, great, and you're not going to be determinedly non-commercial if you go to creative writing class. It's going to ruin you for any kind of original thought or expression. And I would also argue it's going to, deaden your soul. The people who write for the market in general, I don't want to say everyone, but they're just selling themselves out. I mean, because it's not only what you don't actually necessarily believe, but it's also the fact that you're writing poorly and writing something that you don't necessarily believe.
Yeah.
It's so my experience with agents has been very bad, and I barely even get a response from the queries I send out these days. That one from the New York agent was one of the few. That you are getting any kind of critiques at all, Bruce, congratulations. I applaud you. I get nothing. It's like crickets, zero. I send out like hundreds of these things every book, just hoping against hope, maybe. No, nothing. They don't even deign to reply. And I'm the guy who should be writing these books because they're all from a white male perspective. So what the hell? They can't lay that one on me.
Yeah. Well, actually, you Kevin, you mentioned the word commercial, and your last comment makes this point too. I'm just going to make that point explicit because it ties back to something Joe said, that the agents are not, they don't specify in their requirements, right, or their calls for submissions, they don't specify a style or a theme or a subject. They specify essentially identity, right? So what makes commercial, this is why the publishing industry is so depressing. This is why I have to be so pessimistic with new writers who approach me for advice. I say, what makes you commercial is not what you write, it's your identity, and that's immutable. You can't change that.
I'll get in here really quick. I'm speaking too much. I'll let the other gentleman hear, but I affirm that. I have been told in so many words that I'm just too old. You know, I'm 60. I'm too old. And then, I'm not in circulation. I live in Europe. I'm trying to get onto the American market. My books get published generally by a small little boutique house here in Berlin, run by an American woman. I just am not, encouraged on many counts, and age and race and geographic location are three that I can most assuredly say are the reasons.
I'd jump on and say it's identity, but even if someone met the criteria for the immutable characteristics, if they didn't think the right way, and in a weird way, I'm hardened by the fact that this is not entirely new. Hemingway came up earlier, right? And when Arthur Blair or George Orwell wanted to publish Homage to Catalonia, Victor Gallant and all the communists, the Reds and the Pinkos in the United States, sought to suppress the publication of that book. And so he didn't fit the mold, and Ernest Hemingway did his best to prevent that publication. And so he even if today you meet the identity requirements, if your thinking's not commensurate with that radical leftist agenda, then I think you don't stand a chance either.
Yeah.
Well, my main disappointment has been with the non-woke reviewers. I mean, with the notable exception of you, Bruce, who made a great review of my book. It's very hard to get through. Even I did a version in Danish too. And I know some reviewers who are definitely not, they're classical liberals or conservatives. But when I pitched my book to them, there's some snobbery operating. Oh, you don't have an important agent. You're not from an important publishing house. They don't even bother to open it,
Yeah.
Rasmus, for my first book, and the only reason it got attention because it seemed like a Chomsky thing, I had written it using a pseudonym. I incorporated a publishing house, Guy Fawkes Books, with a fake history. I had a fake agent, a guy named Ian Card. Ian Card called around, and because it's an alternate history where Canada was military occupied, he was contacting these reviewers from the occupied provinces. And so it was only the lunacy of that entire thing that got through to people, because otherwise I had the exact same experience with you. No one was interested.
So that's your advice, make a fake publisher.
I don't know if that's replicable, but I think you kind of have to.
I invented the not my job to educate your publishing. That was.
I made a note of that. I thought that was hilarious. And then Persia Publishing for Bruce.
Yeah, Persia Publishing.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I should mention. I've published one other person already. So I'm self-publishing, but I effectively have a publishing house now because I've got 2 authors on it. So I should put out there, if anybody wants to be published, you can be published through one of us. I mean, I'll speak for myself. I will help you to get published. I don't advise publishing with me because, that as Joe just indicated, the industry ignores what we publish. I mean, they do everything they can to suppress it. So it doesn't. If you want to publish anti-woke fiction, you're not doing it to make money. You're doing it to make to get your creativity out there, and I don't do the right thing. I mean, to stand against it, but you're not making money, right?
Well, I don't think it's entirely bleak. Just well, there's a turning point going on. So I see Daily Wire has a new publishing house they're developing, which might just be kind of like an incestuous unit, but I have hope. But I saw Michael Anton, who was a national security advisor in the Trump administration. He had an article out in IM 1776, and his argument was that it's so easy to get a conservative policy paper underwritten and paid for, but there's no patronage on the right because they ignored the culture war. But there's big pushes now, and he used Tom Wolfe as an example. Like most people can't self-finance like he did, and so I think there is a recognition that right-wing or anti-woke, or even you mentioned in your original article unwoke, like Roger Scruton. Those kind of books need to have support. So I think that at least there's been a paradigm shift. So there might be a little bit of hope down the road.
Yeah.
But it's always difficult to sell books, almost regardless of the subject. I mean, try to say to somebody, do you have 2 minutes to talk about Jesus? And they will look in all kinds of direction and try to get an excuse to run away. Then tell them, do you have 10 hours to read my novel? They will melt down. They will run away.
Yeah, I mean, my experience is it's just tough to get published. I mean, I've been at various houses in my career, but it's just tough. And then after that, it's even tougher to get reviewed. So again, yeah, Bruce, thanks a lot for the nice review. But it's really tough. I mean, for example, just back to my Flynn book, which is very weird, right? You write a 400-page epic poem based on the Byronic Don Juan stanza about Errol Flynn, and you're trying to get this reviewed. Well, I came in trying to get it reviewed in America in 2017, 2018. This was at the height of the Me Too movement, and Errol Flynn is not exactly loved by feminists. I mean, he was accused of a double rape. He went to trial for it, other things with Mr. Flynn. So I had like the double whammy of like, or triple whammy, who's this guy? Who's the author? Errol Flynn. So, but it's just hard. And I must have sent about 80 copies of that book, hard copies at my own expense, out. Not just digital copies, just to show them I'm serious. 0. That's a little bit odd, I thought, because I would stand by, the book. To this day, I think it's good. All authors think their books are good. I think some of mine are better than others, but I think that Flynn book is really something, not a thing. So it's just tough in general. Have to say that.
And that was to 80 reviewers or 80 publishing houses?
Various entities,
okay.
People who could do me good, like Professor Newsom, or magazines. Small, medium-sized, large. That was my big blitz because I figured, okay, it's now or never, baby. You're in your late 50s. You got to make a breakthrough if you ever want to have one in the American market. And I thought this is just the thing, just the battering ram. Zilch. It was almost as if they were doing it deliberately. Like, no, we're going to slap this guy down. At a certain point, you get this persecution complex. Before I'd ever had it. I'm not that kind of guy. But with this one, I really thought. So. Got to plug in for that one, not for the postdoc so much.
I mean, Kevin, you mentioned the Me Too movement. They're explicitly in that year, 2018, already by 2018, agents were saying publicly, we got too many white males in the industry and we're not going to accept any more.
And then you hit them with the white male, Errol Flynn. It's terrible. My timing's bad. I just have to, think that.
Well, look, this segues to the next question. If you have anything to add, we've been quite pessimistic about getting our work out, getting published, and then getting it with reviewers. Do you have any advice about how you can advertise anti-woke books in a woke-controlled marketplace?
So I had done an ad campaign or tried on Facebook. They said I would have to promote Lath. They said I would have to register as a political agent to do so, right? You can promote anything, but it was totally ridiculous because they had conservative hashtag. And so I turned to Gab and Getter. Getter was doing advertisements at the time. I'm not sure if they still were, but my money went quite far on those platforms. But on Twitter and Facebook, depending on your content, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. The only problem is marketing on something like Gab or Getter might be an echo chamber. It's a niche within a niche. You're not going to really get to the broader market, but it's better than nothing, I would say. I don't know. Have you guys had any success with print advertising?
Well, I mean, in the past, back in my past, yeah, when I was with a couple larger publishing houses, yeah, that seems to work. You get a half-page advertisement in the New York Review of Books, you're going to sell some books. That happened with me once.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a basis of comparison with where I am now. You know, I know what it's like to have a big publicity machine behind you, and not. I mean, I'm with a very fine little publishing house now. But they just don't have the publicity to push your book. And in comparing my notes, and I kind of travel in these literary circles in Berlin, and if you don't have a big publicity machine to push your book, it's almost predictable. 99 times out of 100, you're just not going to sell any books. You're just not gonna. I don't care how big how great of a book it is. So
did you sell any books after Bruce's review? Did you sell anything after that? After his reviews? Did you sell anything after Bruce's review?
Yes, excuse me. I didn't quite hear you, Rasmus. Yes, I did. Yeah. So next time we meet, I'll buy you a beer.
Yeah, that was my sales boom too.
Because that's the sales. I saw you check on Amazon. At least I do. That's where I kind of check if things are moving. And yeah, there was significant movement. So yes, but then. No, it's no fault of Bruce's, but I've had that in the past, and so you get a little, your numbers jog up a little bit, but then like a few days later they're like back to where they were before. That's been my experience.
Yeah.
So.
Rasmus, any advice? How you advertise?
No, I tried Twitter, but they wouldn't let me. Not even on Amazon because it's sexually explicit. Ooh, naughty. So yeah, I thought I had a great, very funny advert with these mock reviews.
Yeah. I've said it in print. You've got the best cover of any book I've seen in years. I mean, if this could be on the shelves, people would pick it up. If only bookstores would put it on the shelves. People would like, wow, that is, and it's funny. You've got these satirical reviews at the top, which make it funny as soon as you look at the cover. But I guess I'm right in saying no bookstore has stopped your book. Well, look, guys, on that sad note, let's go on to the next question. So listen, you've already given advice for new writers of anti-woke fiction. Do you have anything else you can add? What advice do you have for new writers of anti-woke fiction that you haven't said already?
This came up earlier, but I think there's plenty of political disincentives that we've discussed. But I think it's a great deal of fun and liberating being on the outside, because the identities and the personalities that hold dear to the accepted ideology, they have to stay in line, right? They have to be in sync. And when they, run afoul of the herd, they're often consumed, right? It's just the constant Ouroboros on the left. But when you're outside, you can go full bore. So you might not make a fortune, but you could write, creative, unencumbered content, and it may not be financially beneficial to you now, but there's something about living not by lies and really putting good stuff out there.
Here. Kevin, Rasmus?
Well, I could say that on that note, yeah, Bruce, you have sort of become for me the personification of an anti-woke author, meaning you're fearless. That's an anti-woke author. You're not scared because you're in the academy, man. I could have never written a book like yours or the one that I wrote were I in the academy. I wouldn't have had those kind of cojones. So a tip of the hat to you, but also by way of defining what I think a great anti-woke author needs. Yeah, he needs huevos, you know? And there we go back to Hemingway. I'm sorry, but he was big on cojones and huevos and all the rest. Yeah, so yeah, basically be fearless, because all those other people in the publishing industry, the agents, the publishers, the professors, the administrations, they're all scared out of their wits. They're scared. They're always looking over their shoulder. You know this. But at least, as you say, Joe, we have the luxury of not having to destroy our souls that way. Even if it doesn't get published, even if it doesn't get marketed, you have had the courage of your convictions, and you gotten it down on paper, and you finished it, and, well, let the chips fall where they may. So.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah, I don't know the first thing about the publishing industry. I just assume that the market would take care of it, and if something is entertaining, it would be waved through, and if it's not, it would be discarded. But I'm realizing maybe I'm wrong on that. Because there's so little money in books. Yeah, there's too little money in books, so it's all about winning prizes and getting jobs more than selling books.
Yeah. All right. So listen, this is my final question, but we can take it where we want. So what fiction are you all working on now? And listen, I don't know where to start. Let's go, Kevin, because I think you've got the longest historiography. So listen, yes. What are you working on?
What's an old guy like me scratching away at? Well, I'm writing about Los Angeles. I keep coming back to where I'm from, and I'm finishing up actually a book on growing up in LA. Now, I wrote a novel about growing up surfing in Los Angeles. It's called Surfer Boy. But I am now doing a book about growing up in LA without the surfing, which is much more interesting. And also I'm doing another thing on surfing in the meantime about a friend I grew up with who 50 years later is still surfing. Do a little article on him, a little profile. That's what I'm working on.
But just to clarify, that's nonfiction, right?
The profile is nonfiction. The growing up in Los Angeles is a novelized version of, yes, my experience of growing up in Los Angeles.
All right, Joe?
I just got to throw this in ahead of time. You got to mention The Future of History, because that sounds like a killer book you got in the works there, Bruce. But I am working on, it's called Audacious of New York, and it's an adaptation of the Odyssey set in 1898 after the Spanish-American War. So he's headed back to Ithaca, New York after the Battle of San Juan Heights. And so I tried to take all of this American mythology and kind of replace or augment the Greek original. So Hubritic for sure, trying to not do better than Homer, but to appropriate, but I think it'll be fun.
So let me ask you about the style. So is it sort of epic? Are you saying it's like an epic?
So he's from he's a U.S. cavalryman. It's being retold by one of the people who was under his charge. So someone with immense respect, but kind of old-timey jargon and so forth. Yeah. But, kind of clean and to the point.
So because that's a historical novel, right?
Yeah.
Historical fiction. Well, there's a big genre, a big popular genre there.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Thank you. All right, Rasmus.
Yeah, I'm not working on anything exciting like you guys, sorry. I'm doing journalism. But since it's become such a taboo, I'm very attracted to the idea of writing in the first person and let that first person be black. It will have to be a black person that I can identify with in a special way. But I think, yeah, that's something that's simmering in my mind, how I can do that, just because it's so naughty.
Yeah. Yes, you would be accused of cultural appropriation at least, right?
Well, they're welcome, but...
I remember... Well, remember William Styron did something very similar. About Nat Turner, led the slave revolt, and that was in the early '60s, and got away with it. But that was in a pre-woke era. We're devolving, of course.
Yeah, that was before actors said they will no longer play roles. I'm a heterosexual actor. I will no longer play gay characters. gay actors must play gay characters and things. I mean, that's.
I have to latch on to a different course, yeah. Nothing about race.
Yeah.
A course that I identify with, that I know a lot about.
Yeah. Well, I'll just mention I am working on a novel called The Future of History. I like that title, so it's going to stay that title. I haven't finished it because I'm so busy with a new academic job and my academic writing, which is my excuse for all of my failures to write as quickly as I want to. So Future of History is a satire of woke museums, essentially. So Joe gave me the idea, well, you asked me earlier, is it a sort of sequel to Dark Side of Sunshine? And yeah, I guess it is. I hadn't thought of it that way. It's going to have some of the same characters, a bit like Evil in War. Evil in War would reuse characters, but in novels that don't actually sequentially follow. Yeah, so I'm sticking with the anti-woke genre. I'm going to satirize museums next.
Great. Looking forward to that.
All right, guys, any last advice, any last observations that we should put on record here for the benefit of other authors who are coming here, some of them quite desperate, right? I mean, I get some desperate emails from new authors who are probably deserve to be published, but they're just hopeless. They in literal sense of that word, they are hopeless.
Well, what I would say, were I not to, at some point, find a publisher for any of my stuff, yeah, I'd self-publish. Why not? Be thankful we have that these days.
Yeah.
That's one good aspect of the internet. So next time my book doesn't get a ready acceptance from whatever agents or publishers, then I'm just, I'll go like a shot to the self-publishing option. So there's always that. So it's not hopeless, and you might even like that better. I've heard reports from self-published authors than being with a publishing house. I've heard that, even if you don't sell as many books, and you never know. So yeah. I'm giving him or her or whomever, whatever their pronouns are, hope.
Yeah, I'm going to second that because, sorry, Joe, just get in there, because a lot of people do ask, well, should I self-publish? And we should note that agents, publishing houses will be very, they'll put out these public notices where they'll say, we will not consider you if you've self-published before. The industry is self-protective. It doesn't like self-publishing, right? It has a self-interest in not allowing self-publishing. And so authors get this idea that they imbibe this prejudice against self-publishing, which is, oh, you're not good enough to get published. You're not good enough, so you have to self-publish. So there's this prejudice against it that I'm going to second Kevin on this, that for authors out there, ignore that prejudice. That's motivated by self-interest in the industry and by their political and social biases. They are filtering and censoring, and they're protecting themselves. So this prejudice against self-publishing is wrong. And I'm going to display these. Look how good looking these books. These are all self-published books. They are good looking books that you would have no shame in putting these out for review, apart from if you may get some silly pushback, oh, you're self-publishing, and you should not be influenced by that, and you should push back against it, because your content is good. Your content is good whether you self-publish or not, and the best content is being self-published because it's being filtered out.
And just to add to that, I mean, a guy who hasn't yet self-published, but that's likely in the works at some point. I'm glad to hear you say that. And also, these books can go on to greater successes. 50 Shades of Grey, wasn't that even one of them? Didn't the woman self-publish it? Then it got picked up by some larger publishing house. And where would you be today, Rasmus? Wouldn't have a title for your book if it weren't for her. Yeah. So... Anyway, that's my understanding of how it eventually got out there. But they can get picked up by larger entities, and then you know, better get it out that way than just have it totally shut down and then, you know, put it in the drawer and then keep trying to, you know, peddle your next effort to people who aren't going to look at it anyway. Anyway, I'm done talking about something I don't know anything of in a real way.
I would say it's critical. I think self-publishing is great. And to Bruce's point, the aversion when you see that awarding institutions won't consider you, well, they're not going to consider you anyway. Right. But what I would say is get an editor, right? A second set of eyes. I think that's important. But also, and this is not a hack necessarily, but if you get conferred from Kobo or from Kindle ISBN, just the way it's oriented, libraries know that it's self-published and they usually won't pick up copies. So what I would say, like in Canada, you can get blocks of ISBNs, but different people and different groups and different institutions sell them. So it'd be good to get a proper block because then libraries will pick up copies if there's ever any interest. So it's worth pursuing that end.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Thank you, everybody. I've really enjoyed talking to you. I've loved your work. Keep on the good fight. Keep doing what you're doing. Let's get the work out there and the word and the work. Let's get it out there. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Bruce.
Thank you.